Well, thanks for coming. And today, we just want you to have an opportunity to talk to a couple of people who've done the advanced level Chinese and have gone on to create their careers. And they'll tell you about their careers and all that sort of thing. But the important point is I just wanted to introduce you to the thing is when you spend so much time doing a Chinese advanced level, it's not like a CPA, you know, like accounting where you get a CPA and then you go off and you work for a firm. It's I want to introduce you to people who did the advanced level training and then have gone on to create their own occupations, their own jobs. So let me just, Chris is the president of the Chinese, Columbus School of Chinese. And Sasha is, I'll let her explain to you, but she's interpreting for the State Department as part-time, and she's also serving as an executive in a Chinese corporation. And but there's a lot along the way. So maybe we begin with Sasha.
Okay.
Okay. You have a video.
Oh, I just have some photographs
Okay.
just to explain what I'm doing.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to just leave it there. They'll introduce, and then I thought after they tell you, give you their short introductions, they can ask questions of each other. And then later on, you have a question, you can raise it, but we only have 50 minutes, so we gotta do as much as we can. If you have questions, you can ask questions in Chinese or English. We'll conduct this in English just to make sure we get full coverage, okay? All right, thank you. Sasha. And
Okay.
Chris.
Hi, everyone. I know some of you because I taught Chinese here a few years ago, first year Chinese and fourth year Chinese in Qingdao, right? Yes. So I was in the 2010-2012 Flagship program.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I think so. And then I was in the pedagogy program for 2 years, and then I went to France and I did interpreting school in Paris at Paris 3 University. So the interpreting school is called ESIT, E-S-I-T. And now I'm a conference interpreter. So most people who graduate from interpreting school work as freelancers, which is what I'm doing. And I'm based in DC right now. So I mostly work for the State Department, and I just put together some photos. Okay, this is not actually a press conference. We're just posing for a photo. But this is in the press conference room at the Pentagon on my first interpreting assignment with a government official from Taiwan. So he was the head of the immigration department in one of the Taiwanese provinces. And then I had some more hands-on assignments where we went to, for example, wastewater treatment plants or desalination plants, and we would tour them with Chinese government officials. So these people are all in a State Department program that's been around for about 70 years, and they bring promising foreign professionals to the U.S. to go to different cities, and there's always a theme. So this one was ocean litter, so that's why we visited a lot of wastewater treatment plants. And actually there have been, I think, over 200 heads of state, current heads of state, who have been on this program. And Tony Blair, Sarkozy, they have all participated in this IVLP program. So it's kind of like a cultural exchange. Okay, and this is just my graduating class from the interpreting school. I graduated in June. I think there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think somebody's missing. I think there were 12 people who graduated. On the right is the picture of the building where our interpreting school was located. And I found a photo from the 50s because NATO used to be based in this building before France actually left NATO. And so our school uses the old interpreting booths and the old rooms from NATO, hopefully with new equipment. But that room where we're standing is one of the big conference rooms. Because France actually left NATO in the 60s, and then they donated the building to the university. So if anybody has any specific questions about attending school in France, it's a very different experience. People often repeat a year or repeat 2 years. It's a very common thing. And I think part of the reason is there's no tuition, so the school can make you repeat, and it's not really a big burden on you. So this is not the class that entered the school, because we had certain people who were expelled and certain people who had to repeat. So this is kind of like a mixed group. We had about at least 5 people who were expelled. And to be expelled, you don't have to be a bad student. They just feel like you're not up to their standards and they can expel you. Since you didn't pay tuition, they don't really owe you anything. It's not in their interest to make sure you're okay. Like if you can't do it, you just can't do it. Okay. Okay, and then this is from my latest experience. I went to Wuhan about 3 weeks ago. This is my partner at my work there. Her name is Zhang Ying. She's from Inner Mongolia. She's a very strong Inner Mongolian woman. So I met this company called Shenglong Dianqi in Paris when I was working for a French electric company. And the CEO of Shenglong was there, and somehow we got along well. He decided that I need to sort of work for them part-time. And I went there a few weeks ago to do a training course with Zhang Ying. And so basically, we had no idea what it would be like. There was not much communication going on before the training program. So we assumed it would be something for the executives. But then it turned out that it was in the factory without air conditioning. And maybe you know that Wuhan is one of the sort of ovens of China, dahuo. So it was really, really hot, and we're in the factory, and there's background noise from the equipment. And there are about 400 people, including the factory workers here on the right. So our content was not necessarily adapted to all of the audience members. So we had to kind of adjust once we were there. So we had to stand on that stage and just kind of talk. And then we had a big group picture in the end. So Zhang Ying and I are there in the middle. And these are all the people who listened to our presentation. And because everything was planned at the last minute, we basically showed up with materials for the first day. And then we had 4 days that we were supposed to speak. And then we would do 3 hours in the morning, we would have a banquet, and then we would prepare for the next day. So we had to kind of half improvise, half prepare at the last moment. And we also redid the whole thing on Friday for a wine company that invited us. So it was a very long 4 days. Anyway, that's it, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of my work. So,
well, I did not have a PowerPoint, so I apologize. Sasha, again, is making me look bad. Would you try to pull up
your website?
Yeah, website. Yeah. That might work best. So just by show of hands, who here is a Flagship student? Okay. Who here is in advanced level Chinese classes? Awesome. And any others?
I'm a Chinese linguistics MA student.
Awesome. Okay. Is everyone looking to use Chinese in their career? Oh, great. So as Dr. Walker had mentioned, my name is Chris Bellato. I run the Columbus School of Chinese. We started this school about 8 years ago now. Originally the school was just for youth and adult programs. So we were holding after school programs and programs at night for adult language learners. And the vast majority of our students are non-native students. So they're the second one there.
Oh, you get
Not a
5
problem.
stars.
Oh.
Yes, we always get 5 stars.
This one, right?
Yes, that is it there. So as the business has grown, which it has done drastically over the last 6 or 7 years, we added corporate training, pre-K classes, classes for expats relocating to China. And the vast majority of this is language training, but we also do some cultural competency training as well. We work with, when we do the corporate training, more of the consulting, language, expat relocation training, we work with companies like Cardinal Health, Abercrombie and Fitch, White Castle, a lot of the companies that are operating in China now. For our language learners who are just coming or not attached to a corporation or anything like that, it's typically non-native language learners or students who are adopted from China whose parents or they themselves want to learn Chinese. Occasionally the kids don't want to learn, but the parents really want them to learn. Yeah. So we are kind of a response to a heritage school, if you're all familiar with what a heritage school looks like. Heritage schools basically are Chinese parents bringing their kids to a Saturday or Sunday school to improve writing, listening, reading skills. We are more focused on oral communication, and we have a very fun kind of playful environment for our students to learn. And we're also 100% immersion, so I would say 80 to 90% of our language instruction is done in Chinese. So I'm also very tired. I'll tell you a little bit about my personal life. I'm working on a lack of sleep. My wife and I had our baby girl about 4 weeks ago now. So I haven't slept a full night since then. So if I don't make a lot of sense today, that is why. Just before that, I also raced my bike across the United States of America. So I had a very busy summer. And so while I was doing that, my team at the school kind of ran everything. So we have quite a few individuals who work at the school. Also, Emma is one of our interns and just came on part-time. So we offer a lot of those kinds of opportunities for individuals like yourselves who are high-level language learners and have high-level abilities who can help with teaching classes, consulting, and so on and so forth. So that is what I do most of the day. Good?
Yep.
That work? Awesome. I can tell you a bit more about the school as we go through some of the question and answers. That sound good?
So I thought we would just go and have Sasha and Chris question each other.
But do you okay if we sit here or no?
Yeah, sit there around that microphone. I do hope we have a clearance for recording.
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
I'm fine with it too.
So I'll start the questioning if that's okay with you. So when I did the Flagship program as well. I took a little bit longer and then went right into the PhD program, which I did not finish. And Dr. Walker reminds me about that every so often. I left the program to start the school. So one thing that I found is that you have to have, everybody in here I'm sure speaks Chinese very well. And there's a lot of people who speak Chinese very well. So there's something else that has to kind of set you apart from that group of people. Would you say that you found that to be true, that you needed some other skill to be able to pair with your Chinese language ability?
Yes. I mean, I guess for me, my skill would be interpreting, because our training at Paris was very rigorous for interpreting skills. And also, I think you have to have a somewhat flexible approach. So you have to be able to adapt to the situation that you're in. And I found that there are certain things that a Chinese person can say that you just can't say because you're an outsider. Right. So you have to tone things down a bit. And this was something that I saw from our training program. Because my partner, she was very, very outspoken. And she would really say some things that would put people on edge. But they weren't quite over the edge because she was at least Chinese. But that's something that I would never talk about. So you have to have a sort of certain sensitivity to the situation that you find yourself in.
Yeah. So
what about you, Chris?
Thank you. I personally found that when I finished the Flagship program, my language skills were very, very good for me anyway. But I was lacking something else. So it was some other skill that I could kind of market. And that was actually why I entered the PhD program, which was one of the best decisions I've made, because during the period of time between the Flagship program and the PhD program, we had to go through teacher training. And so I was a TA here and taught for about 6 semesters at that point. And that skill to be able to pair the language ability with the ability to teach was something that has been very, very profitable for me. And then moving forward, I had to find opportunities to build other skills, like the ability to consult, which some consultants have that ability and some don't. If you're a good consultant, you know how to consult well. And so the teaching, the consulting ability, and then also kind of general administration of a business is something that you have to learn how to do. I did not go to an MBA program or anything like that, so those were all things that I had to learn on the ground. But they were skills that kind of set me apart from the other individuals who spoke Chinese very well. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of times we'll have students that come to the school and they're looking for a job at the school. And they say, well, my Chinese is phenomenal. Even native speakers, my Chinese is phenomenal. There's a lot of people whose Chinese is phenomenal. That doesn't set you apart at all. So being able to develop certain other skills that will help you kind of set you apart. I think some of those things are like interpretation, the ability to interpret. Teaching, obviously, is something that when I see somebody who has high language skills, the ability to teach and they're good at it, that sets them apart, right?
And so, teaching, and just to add on, designing a curriculum, planning things, organizing a study abroad trip, things like that are all skills. So if you don't feel like you have skills, don't worry, you can add them on to your Chinese language. You can explore different areas and see what interests you.
And that's also something I felt like when I did my second year at Ohio State, which was in Beijing. I did the whole time in Beijing. I wasn't really using the time effectively in terms of developing other skills beyond the language. I was learning how to do xiangsheng and kuaiban, if you're familiar with those kind of things, those various comedy routines, but those didn't pay the bills and weren't going to pay the bills unless I was going to do that professionally, which I was not able to do. So finding those opportunities when you're in China or in your advanced studies are something I think that will really set you apart in the future.
Yeah, I really agree. What kind of skills did you feel like you really needed to start with school, to start your own business?
So the first 2 years I made every mistake possible, so that was kind of like my MBA, which was much cheaper than Ohio State, oddly enough. But I would say kind of the ability to manage people is one thing that really has been helpful, because there's, right now there's 5 people working at the school while I'm away, and they need to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And that's something that if you're a good leader, I think those are pretty clear. So the ability to manage people, and then also how to kind of sell people on the value of what we're doing. I think that's also something that's very important. I would say those.
Yeah, and in terms of interpersonal skills, I always find that it's a very fine balance, especially if you're a lady, to maintain your own personality and dignity and be taken seriously. So you don't want to be this cute foreign girl all the time. So how do you establish yourself as a thinking individual?
That's a great point, because there is this point where you go from kind of being a puppet on a stage, where you'll go and do your xiangsheng performance or your kuaiban performance, or you'll go and do something as an MC at an event, to people actually taking you seriously as a business professional who uses Chinese on a daily basis. And everybody that I know that was in the Flagship program that went on to use their Chinese professionally had to go through that process, where you're no longer just the person that somebody can call to go do a performance or be an MC or whatever. It's somebody that they take you very seriously in your professional communication, and how to teach the language, consulting to businesses, interpreting, and so on and so forth. Next question? Or should we open it up? What do you think?
Okay. You go for it.
Because somebody is whispering, open it up. We'll open the floor up to questions if you have any.
I guess I was the one who started that, so I might as well ask. So my first question was just related to the first thing. What is interpretation school in terms of the number of years and in terms of what you graduate with? Like, is it a doctoral degree or a certificate, or what does that look like from a program standpoint by the time you're done?
Okay, good question. So normally it's either 1 or 2 years. The more traditional older schools are 2 years, and they all basically follow the same format. So you have the first year as consecutive. You start with so-called memory translation, so you don't take any notes. You just interpret from memory for about 2 months, and then you add notes, and you make the piece that you interpret longer and longer. And by the end of the year, you should be able to do 6 or 7 minutes while taking notes. And then your exam is just on consecutive. The second year is simultaneous. And we also had 2 additional classes. One was sight translation, and one was simultaneous with text. So sight translation is it's a great language exercise even for people who are not interpreters. So you take an article in English and you read it smoothly in Chinese, like out loud. So you interpret it. It's kind of like a simultaneous exercise, except you're looking at a text instead of listening to something. I mean, you can start with something easy, but it's a great exercise for seeing what kind of structure you can't make and what kind of vocab you still lack. So that was a class we had, and then we had simultaneous with text, where they would give you a speech that's kind of dense and has a lot of numbers, and then they would read it quickly, and you kind of read ahead while interpreting at the same time, because that's the situation in a lot of international organizations. People will come in with a speech, they'll give it to you 10 minutes ahead of time, you have just 10 minutes to preview the speech, and you need to use it for the numbers, but you're mostly listening. So that's basically the format. It's a master's degree. And in the US, there are 2 interpreting schools that I know of. There's Monterey in California, which is also a master's degree. And then there's one at the University of Maryland in the School of Communication. I'm not sure what kind of degree that is. It might also be a master's degree. I'm not 100% sure. The 2 oldest schools are the ones in Paris, and there's one in Geneva.
Sasha?
Yeah.
Question. Was your interpretation training just on Chinese, or was it including other languages also included in that?
So the languages that you can have depends on the school that you go to. I think in Monterey you can just have 2 languages. In Paris, everybody has to have at least French and English in their combination. And you could just have French and English. You could just have 2. But if you have two, it has to be French and English. So you could have from 2 to 4 languages. And then you have an A language, a B language, and a C language. The A language is your native language or your most proficient language, usually the language in which you were educated. So for that would be English. Your B language is either your other native-like language or your best language. So that would be Russian for me. And then your C language is any other language. So that would be Chinese and French. So the classes that I had were A to B, B to A, and C to A. So I didn't have classes actually going into Chinese, and that's what I'm working on in work, because I mostly work with Chinese and I mostly work into Chinese. But because of their scheduling constraints, they can't, arrange all these classes for you.
So to piggyback off what Sasha just said, I think her language abilities are phenomenal and much better than mine. And I think that's something that's important to identify, like what it is that you're really good at and what it is that maybe you shouldn't be doing. And so from my perspective, I knew that I was not going to be good at interpretation or translation. So that was just something I just didn't do. But I really enjoy teaching, and I think I've been pretty good at it. So identifying those things that you're really good at and really honing in on them, working on them, perfecting them, I think that is kind of a good road path to success personally.
Yeah, I agree.
So you kind of touched on this earlier, like Chinese people thinking that like you're cute when you speak their language. How do you overcome that? How do you get them to like take you seriously? Because I mean, I've had other professors talk to me about it before. Other like Native American, like Chinese speaking professors say that like when they go over to China, like Chinese people will like kind of tease them and like want to test them and be like, oh, like can you read this? Like what does that say? How do you say this? How do you get past that and get to like a level of operation where there's like because I'm an accounting major and I intend to go into like the business world, so I don't want to be seen as like, oh, he's just a cute little American kid. Like,
well, some people just I feel won't take you seriously no matter what. So you have to find people who are moderately open to that. And I think I just try to talk about substantive issues as much as possible. Like talk about a topic and share your ideas, and they'll see that you have ideas and you have a stance as well. And I find it particularly difficult for ladies because you tend to be viewed as just this decoration sometimes. But I find that at this Chinese company, the CEO actually took me seriously from the get-go and that made me interested in the company. So with some people, you just get a vibe, like, okay, they're viewing me as a human being, and let me try to build on that.
I would say it's never going to stop happening. That is always something you deal with being a non-native speaker of Chinese. It's kind of like dealing with tones. Tones are always going to be challenging to a certain degree, right? But I do think that if you develop meaningful relationships with individuals and groups of people, people start taking you more seriously, and it is a process. There's also this sense kind of, I think, of like personal branding, where people start to talk about you as a professional or you as a language speaker, and they start to take you a bit more seriously. I did not ever have that experience when I was in college or in grad school. It wasn't until I had a title that was something other than grad student or student that people started to take me seriously that way.
Having a title is a good first step. So your title might not be very real, or it might not correspond to that title in English, but it gives you a status.
And you can use some of those opportunities where you are kind of performing to your advantage. A lot of the times that I was asked to perform on stage and do those kinds of things turned into very profitable opportunities, or opportunities where I would meet people that I wouldn't otherwise meet. But it is super annoying. And it doesn't stop being annoying until, it's still annoying. It's still annoying to this day.
But like with Shenglong, for example, when I met them, I was interpreting, so they saw me in my role as an interpreter, and I've never done any kind of performance for them, like no singing, no dancing, no emceeing. And when I went there for the training program, we had to do it in Chinese, and it was content-based. So that was actually one of the first times I felt more or less taken for the worth of what I was saying and my ideas. But it is very difficult.
Do you find that preparing something particularly well, if you've been given an assignment ahead of time and coming with everything done in a very almost perfect kind of way, helps that the way people view you at all, or do you just have to kind of slog through it the whole way?
Do you mean for interpreting or
Well, for
just
any
anything?
of the overcoming the cuteness thing, if you say what you mean to say very well, do people treat you any differently, or?
I think it kind of plays into the cuteness thing sometimes if you prepare a lot of nice chongyus to introduce yourself. So sometimes actually I don't make it very straightforward on purpose. Because I can go into my thing like, oh, long sha sha, sha sha bia de sha, and then I was like, oh, sha sha bia de sha. So sometimes you just want to be a little more serious, and you definitely want to be prepared.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't want it to be too
Flowery.
flowery.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of, because he's an accountant, like if you have a hard set of data and information and you deliver that well, does that help a little
Yes.
bit?
You definitely want to be prepared.
Yeah.
So if you go and interpret, you want to be prepared, and then you never know who's going to be there and who's going to see you doing a good job, or who's going to see you doing a bad job if you don't come prepared.
Could you guys talk about this concept of domain? Because we kind of emphasize this here. And
Yeah, Chris,
if you've had
what was
any
your
experience
thesis
in that.
on?
So my
Flagship
domain
program?
was I was studying traditional folk art, specifically traditional magic. So I wrote the biography of one of the last traditional magicians in China. And I did that because I was very interested in street performance. So things like, is everybody familiar with xiangsheng? Like comic crosstalk, kuaiban, which is another form of storytelling. Those kinds of oral storytelling traditions were things that I was really fascinated by, and there's a lot of that in traditional Chinese magic. And with that, I really learned how to, when we say perform, everybody's kind of familiar with this idea of performance beyond just perform kind of how you traditionally think of it. So performing in the language and culture was something that I had to do to write this particular biography. So I was having to go and act as an apprentice. I was having to learn kind of a traditional art form on my own. I was entering that role as a kind of a student and a master's apprentice. And my master treated me just like he treated all his other Chinese students. So I was not cut any slack because I was not Chinese. So having that domain, it allowed me to do a lot of things. One, I was able to talk to the most well-known magicians, performers in China. So I would sit down at banquets with people that, it would be like sitting down with Dave Chappelle, Seinfeld, Louis C.K., and it was just kind of like a random conversation, like, yeah, Chris is part of the conversation. That was because I was so well-spoken in that particular domain that they took me seriously. So being able to really have meaningful conversations about traditional folk art was something that opened all sorts of doors. Also having this idea where you're stepping into various roles and having to take on the responsibility of that roles, like teacher, like somebody who's acting as the Chinese side when you're doing some sort of scenario training, so on and so forth. That's a learned skill. That's not something that you're just able to do. So for my domain, I think it actually provided me with skills that I was able to use in every aspect of my career, whether it be teaching, acting as a consultant, having kind of very deep conversations about things in Chinese with a particular group. So that was how my domain helped me. I think it really advanced my career quite a bit. And now when a lot of people come to the school, they identify me as the person who did crosstalk 10 years ago that they saw, right? So you have that instant kind of credibility. I think I'm a way better teacher than I am, performer of crosstalk, but if that's what gets them in the door, great.
So at the time, my thesis was on internet slang, 网络语言. Unfortunately, a lot of it apparently is not used anymore, so it went out of date very quickly. And now
It's a snapshot. Right?
it's a snapshot of internet slang in 2012 in China. And I would say that, I didn't have a very technical thesis like some other people who had theses on labor unions and labor relations and these kinds of very specific topics. I would say the biggest value for me was just forming lasting friendships and connections with the people who helped me on my thesis. So my main goal was to get along with people and just to hear their opinion on why certain words are used, what are their frustrations in life. These are mostly friends from the media who helped me on my thesis. So that was a very important aspect. And just in terms of people taking you seriously, I think another important thing that you need to keep in mind is you just want to be a well-informed person. So at the interpreting school, they really hammered it in, you know, if you're going to be an interpreter, you have to read the news every day. You have to listen to the news a little bit in each of your languages. You just want to be well-rounded. So if people mention something, if you can continue talking to them about it, if you could explain something to them, like, oh, what's going on with renewable energy in California, maybe you can give them an overview. I mean, this would really help your credibility and help them think about the issue rather than you as a foreigner. So the thesis process was very helpful, and I'm still in touch with these people. And I think only now I've really begun to realize the value of guanxi and of having relationships with people. It's really what it is over time. It's not whether you can get along with someone at a dinner party and have a great time.
Yeah.
It's, do you actually keep in touch with them? Do you nurture that relationship? And then it can pay back in unexpected ways. So once you have a more of a time perspective on your relationships with Chinese people, I think you'll value them more and you'll see what they mean to you.
And I found also with the domain, and this, even if you're not in a flagship program, if you're kind of looking for something to hone in on, I found it very helpful to follow a passion. Because the more passionate you are about the thing you're studying, the more you're going to delve into it, and the better your language abilities are going to be. So I think my speaking and listening abilities increased the most when I was interacting with folk performers every day. Because that was something I was really passionate about. So I wanted to learn more, I wanted to speak more, I wanted to develop that guanxi with those types of people. Some of my classmates, I think, followed things that they thought would be more suited to the career they were looking for, and ended up kind of just hating what they wrote. I loved every page of what I wrote, and I still do. I go back and look at it every now and again, just because it was a great time where I was following a passion, and it ended up working out really well financially and from a career perspective. So a lot of people say don't kind of follow your passion in that way. I would say definitely, and do it like wholeheartedly and with a lot of perseverance. Yeah,
and I'll just add to say that, you know, if you're not a flagship student, then the idea of domain is still very useful in learning. And if you are a flagship student, it doesn't end with your flagship thesis. So for example, when I do interpreting work or I'm prepping for an assignment, it's very domain oriented. So I just had this 3-week assignment on renewable energy. That's why I mentioned California. And so it's a good way to learn about an issue. Just take an issue, I don't know, wastewater treatment, and read about it in English and Chinese and be able to speak about it like an educated individual. And this is what's going to increase the breadth and depth of your Chinese and also your ability to communicate with people. So domain is something that you should just keep in mind all the time, as in what is the domain I should know about, what domain should I learn about. It's a very useful idea.
The other tricky thing about domain is that it makes the people that you're interacting with think that you know that much stuff about everything. I think that's part of the strategy, correct? Right. So if you sound like you really know a lot about wastewater or traditional, Chinese performance or whatever it is, they're going to assume that you know a hell of a lot about a lot of other things, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? You're presenting this image of being an expert in Chinese, and I think that really helps. That helps people take you more seriously, definitely.
Everyone in here is working in some domain.
Okay.
Like the 5th level, they're working in the domain of getting out of a village and doing business in the city. That's their domain. But it's a domain that a lot of Chinese are familiar with.
Right.
But I want to ask you a dangerous question from my perspective. Like we build our things, so we kind of build our course on domains, Chinese language. So you have a course on Chinese language. You have one on media, you have one on negotiation, you have one on relationship, networking, all these. Do any of that stay with you after going through it? Have you ever had a conversation about Chinese language with a Chinese?
Oh, all the time. People love talking about language. That's the number one domain you should master. Yeah. So how do I talk about characters and how you write your name and ideas about language? Now, of course, ideas about language are different from the reality of linguistics, so it might not correspond to, language being mostly oral, but you want to be able to play along with it and talk about it. Yeah. And have the tools that you need to talk about language. Right. So I would say the language course stuck with me. The Chengyu course is very helpful. Just in terms of putting these Chengyu in a sentence and also emphasizing the importance of just always remembering a sentence with a word in it and not just a word. Let me think. I'll think a little bit more and then you can.
I think, yeah, for me, it was probably learning how to use those various domains, in with my main interest. So for me, it was kind of easy because when you're talking about performance, folk performance, you're always talking about language. And so the more I knew about the language, the more I could have intelligent conversations about the language. We had a class on law, which was a little bit more challenging. That was one I would say I didn't.
We didn't have a law class.
Yeah, we had a law,
Okay.
Chinese law class that
That's true.
was very
Yeah.
challenging, and I don't think I took too much away from, I'm sorry to say. But all the others, I have to say all the others, there was some way that I could kind of fill in certain gaps within my own domain, that I was able to apply those lessons into something that I was using on a daily basis.
And I remember we had a class on Chinese history, which was taught by the visiting scholar,
Oh.
and it was really hard to absorb any information from it. But that being said, it is a learning experience in and of
Yeah.
itself because you want to know how people were
Yeah.
trained in China and how were their teachers teaching them. So I think the best attitude in this kind of situation is just try to remain positive and tell yourself, okay, I'm going to try to get what I can out of it.
Yeah.
And that being said, the history class did bring up some proper nouns, some mythical characters. You want to know these sounds. So even if you don't get the history, okay, you need to remember a few names. That'll be very helpful for your future professional development.
So in regards to starting the Flagship program, I have not been entirely educated at OSU. I've had my Chinese education in other locations as well as at OSU. So for those who are at OSU, I understand if you complete the process, then you know the process here, you know you're ready to start the Flagship if that's what you want to do. But what would you say is a good benchmark for coming into the Flagship program in terms of being ready to do what you needed to do in the Flagship program if you don't have all of your education?
I didn't.
Neither of us did undergrad at OSU either.
Where did you go to undergrad?
So I was at Miami for 4 years, and then studied in China for 2 after that. But I would say, unless you are at Ohio State, and you're kind of brought up in that performed culture pedagogical methodology, it's going to be a bit of shock on that first day of class. I think I had a great metamorphosis when I was here because I went from somebody who was very resistant to all that to actually somebody who was so kind of on board. I really drank the Kool-Aid when I was here, which is a good thing. I don't think coming in from a different background is actually a negative thing. I think that actually can be a strength.
Good for the program also,
Yeah.
just to have people with different backgrounds. I went to UVA for undergrad, and then I did a year studying abroad at IUP, which I know is very much different from the Flagship pedagogy, but I think it gave me a very good vocab and grammar foundation. Basically, it's like language boot camp for a year. And I thought it was a perfect combination with Flagship because I didn't have any culture or anything added on to that language training. So I just came in with lots of grammar structures and sentences. And so for me, I think it's good to have a feeling solid in Chinese to a certain extent because you're not going to be guided through grammar structures. Nobody's going to take you by the hand and say, okay, let's write sentences now. You need to be either able to do that on your own, or you have to have some kind of foundation that you can then build on.
And being very open to the process. The people who are here know what they're doing, and I think maybe when I first came in, I wasn't completely sure of that. And then once my language ability started improving, I really kind of valued how the language was being taught. And now we do very similar things at the school with how we teach our adults, we teach our youth students. So I think you need to have an open mind to the process, and I think that would be the best way to kind of enter into the program.
Yeah, and I miss those days a lot.
Yes.
You're sitting there and somebody's trying to explain something to you that's going to be so helpful to you in the future.
Yes.
Now you just have to identify these things on your own.
What sorts of resources do you guys use for like translation and language maintenance? Like if you come across a word that you don't know, if you come across a sentence structure that you don't know, because I can just look at my textbook, or I use the Pleco translation app. If I see a word that I don't know. And
Pleco has a lot of dictionaries that you can purchase, so I use a lot of those dictionaries. I always look for how it's used in context. So I use Google and I'll have I'll put quotes around it. So I don't know, Zioye. I want to know what Zioye goes with. and then you can put 就业, and then you can put an asterisk, like if you want to know if it's 就业机会 or what goes with the word. So I'll Google this in the news section, and then you'll get lots of sentences with that. Because you always want as many examples as possible. And then I'll try to, like when I prepare my vocab list, I'll try to add a few typical combinations. I don't know.
I do something similar with Baidu where I use that a lot to see whether or not how I've tried to express my meaning, whether or not it's correct and other native speakers are using it in the same way. But I'm kind of lucky in that I'm surrounded by native speakers pretty much every day. They are either working at the school or we're just interacting with parents who are native speakers. So I use those individuals as resources on a daily basis. And I think one way to kind of flip that dynamic of you being kind of like the monkey on stage is to come from the perspective of I'm trying to learn. I would like to learn more about your language and culture. And that really does change the dynamic of the relationship from my perspective and experience. So I would say using native speakers who are willing to help out is probably the best way to advance skills and learn about grammatical structures you're not familiar with. And also it's good to see, is this something that you would use? You know? You're going to learn all sorts of stuff in textbooks, not in these textbooks obviously, but in other textbooks that native speakers
They don't have textbooks.
Oh, perfect. You're going to learn all sorts of things somewhere, right? Whether it be on Pleco or in past textbooks that native speakers really don't use that frequently. And I think it's good to ask why and well, how would you express this particular thought or this particular grammatical structure? How would you use it?
Yeah. Also, something that you have to keep in mind is that when a native speaker uses a structure you don't understand, you really want to write it down as soon as possible because you're going to forget it.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult to learn new words from native speakers because it'll just vanish at some point. Maybe just ask them to write it down for you, or go to the bathroom and write it down really quickly, at least the pinyin, so you could look it up, or you could ask them about it. So I find that you have to have a certain level of self-discipline in order to really keep track of the things that you don't know.
I do think, Dr. Walker just held up his cell phone. I think my cell phone is probably the most critical piece of information or thing in my life right now for various reasons, but studying the language is one of them. Also, one thing I found...
Yeah. I was just going to ask, does anybody use Anki, speaking of cell phones?
I use Memrise.
Okay.
It's very similar.
Anki. Yeah, I like Anki. I'm sure there are several programs like that, but it allows you to make flashcards, and then you can synchronize them between your cell phone and your computer. And I like that you can look at them from one side, or you can have it first show you the English, and then you look at the Chinese. And whenever I don't have anything to do, I'm just flipping through my flashcards. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, not at all. I still to this day use podcasts all the time.
Oh yeah,
Because podcasts are one of those things where if you find the right podcast, they're updated frequently. They usually have some sort of script with characters and pinyin. And they're going to cover a lot of the things that you hadn't learned otherwise. They're also, if you find good podcasts, they're going to be done by either a team, it's a team approach, native speakers, non-native speakers, or just native speakers. And the stuff that they cover typically is stuff that you're going to use at some point. So I use podcasts.
And I would really recommend, if you feel like you're up for it, trying some site translation. So just take something in English that's simple. You don't even have to do it according to the text. You can just read it and see, can I summarize it in Chinese? You can start by doing that. And then you could move on to, can I actually translate it into good colloquial Chinese?
Yeah.
So I find that's a good way if you're at a high level to see where are the gaps that you need to fill in.
So for the method of site translation, is that literally look at English, speak Mandarin? Is that how it goes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, if you have a friend, you could ask the friend to read the English to you first, so you have a general idea of what the text is saying, and then you take it, and then you read it, so that you sound as if you're actually giving a presentation.
So it's eyes to mouth, it's not ears?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So that's a good practice too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you still have a question? You had your hand up.
Answered it as you.
Oh, okay.
So I'll ask this slightly dirtier question, which is, as an employer, somebody comes from the Flagship program to ask for a job or to try and get an interview. What would you be expecting them to be able to do, and what would you be expecting the conversation to go like about that? Or even as a, like, I don't know if you employ people, but a coworker or somebody comes into your field as well.
So I can give you some pointers on things. If you were coming to the Columbus School of Chinese, what I would look for that would set you apart from the field. Everybody comes and says, oh, I've done X number of years of study at OSU in whatever it may be, teaching English as a foreign language, teaching Chinese, and then that's it. But I can tell you every resume I get has that. So that's kind of the bar. If you don't have that, you shouldn't be sending the email in the first place. So what are the things that are going to set you apart, right? So I think you mentioned before having run a program in the past, or being involved in Star Talk programs, even camp programs. I know you did some camp programs at the Columbus School of Chinese a few years ago, right? I remember every face. So those kinds of little things where you have this experience that you've done in the past that you can draw on, right? I think those are the kinds of things that when I look at a resume, I'm saying, okay, they've worked with kids, they've worked with adults, they've had this experience on the ground, they've actually made the effort to find these opportunities. And so to speak about Emma a little bit, if I can put you on the spot, like with all of the students or interns or teachers that come to the school, we always have kind of a grace period where we're seeing, is this person actually a good fit? With somebody who comes in, is always on time, always looking for things to do when they're at the school, and it's not just sitting there because it's not their class time, those are the kinds of things where I say, okay, this is a responsible individual who is looking for other opportunities and looking to advance themselves. So those are the kinds of practical things I think that you can display to an employer. Also, I love to see non-native speakers have specific scores on their resume. So OPI, score of 5. HSK, I don't even know how they score the HSK anymore. They change it every year, but HSK 6, right? And then other standardized tests. A lot of individuals, especially non-native speakers, don't have that on their resume. And that's something where I know, okay, this person could lead an adult class tomorrow if with the right training. Because just saying I took 4 years of Chinese at Ohio State, I'm sure your Chinese is great, but is it good enough to teach a group of advanced level adult students? Probably not. So those kinds of little indicators are helpful as well.
If I'm looking for an interpreting colleague, I would want somebody professional, and let's say they're not Chinese and they went to the Flagship program. I just want them to make Chinese people feel comfortable and kind of not notice them. That's kind of part of the idea. Like you're facilitating a conversation. I mean, sometimes you're in a booth so people don't see you. You just kind of want to be there and not cause any problems so that you're invisible, and invisible is kind of good. So I have to say I do feel a little bit awkward sometimes because as an interpreter I'm not there, but then the Chinese people always want to talk to me. So it's always difficult for me to tell where am I overstepping the boundaries of being professional. I mean, I'm not supposed to hang out with a client or have dinner with them, but then they're really curious and they want to hang out, and I kind of want to too. So it's a delicate balance, but you always want to make sure that you're professional and think about what do your colleagues expect of you.
So I have a question about like how the Flagship program helped in your current careers. So if you guys had not chosen what's called interpreting or teaching, and you decided to work in the field that your what's called domain was in, do you feel like with the Flagship degree alone, it was enough as a standalone degree to get you into that field? Or do you feel like you needed that additional experience in another field in order to?
I mean, personally, I felt that I needed an interpreting degree to be an interpreter. Also, if you want to work in Paris, you need a degree from that school, preferably, because it's kind of a very small community. It's almost like a little mafia. So once you get the degree, you're a member of this group of 100 people or so, and then you have the most fun jobs. With Flagship, I think I would have gone more into teaching. I think if you feel like you can teach, you could transition to a teaching program or a PhD program. Chris, how did you feel about it?
I would say, yeah, without the teacher training I did here, there was definitely a giant gap between what I wanted to do and what I was able to do. So the Flagship program was great for getting me to kind of a professional level of Chinese. But then, like I said earlier, you need that other skill. And for me, that was doing the teacher training so then I could apply what I had learned in terms of my own language abilities to kind of convey that to students who were looking to learn the language. So, and I think that's something you need to think about. If you do the Flagship program or not, or whatever you may do, language is not enough. There needs to be something else that is going to be marketable. And so whether it's interpretation,
yeah, absolutely true.
Teaching, being able to market, there's a lot of the individuals that we work with, They have strong language skills, and then they know how to market to the Chinese, and they are a hot commodity, right? So they'll work for companies here in the United States that are looking to sell more to the Chinese. So that ability to market, right? That's another skill that would be very
Yeah, marketing yourself is very important. And some interpreters, they don't go to interpreting school, they just start interpreting, which is fine as well. But the Paris school, since I understand French, I knew I could qualify for it. And I'd heard about it for a long time. And very importantly, it's also a brand. So I say, I went to the school, people will hire you. So I definitely also felt like I needed something else in addition to the flagship training.
Can I ask one more question? Or somebody else have a question?
Emma, go ahead.
So when you did the teacher training, that was part of the PhD program?
Technically, that was part of my being a TA, right?
So to TA training or speak?
It was TA training.
Okay.
But what was nice about it, so we did the TA training, so it was actually a class where we were, and then our year was working with Dr. Noda. Each year it rotated. So we were working with Dr. Noda, and so we would do basically training before school started. I think it was in July or August. But it was basically, we had a group of students who were learning how to, implement best practices and so on and so forth. And then throughout the year, we would meet with Dr. Noda and the group to kind of get some feedback and debrief about how we could improve our teaching. So that was something that was actually TA training. And because I was in the PhD program, I was also teaching quite a lot because of that program as well.
And I was in the TA training program as well, because then I taught here. And I think for me, one of the big takeaways is how do you improve whatever aspect you want to improve. And one of it is you have to be able to observe yourself. So throughout the year, we would record our classes. And it's kind of a horrible feeling to watch a video of yourself teaching or to listen to your voice. But you have to do it if you want to improve. And that goes for anything. Whether you're giving a flagship presentation and you have a video of it, you can then watch it and think about what you want to improve. Maybe you have some kind of tic that you have no idea about. Maybe you're waving your hand around awkwardly. And for interpreting, we would always record ourselves and then we would go home and just force ourselves to listen to it.
And what I would do is I would always invite either native speakers or other instructors to come into the class to give me feedback at the end. So that was something I did throughout the first year, and I got some of the best responses from instructors from their experience. This is how you could improve on this or that, because the things that you're already good at you don't need to work on, but there's certain areas where you're definitely going to need to improve.
And another important skill, whether it's for teaching or the flagship program, is public speaking. You have to be able to confidently stand up and kind of improvise if you have to.
Yeah.
Like maybe you didn't have as much time to prepare as you could, or maybe you didn't know you were supposed to speak on a particular topic. But I think it really helps for teaching as well. You want to practice having a presence, feeling like you're controlling the class, or you're at least guiding it, and confidently being able to speak in front of a lot of people. Because a lot of people come into the program without that coming naturally. But there are a lot of things that you can actually work on that you might think you either can or you can't, but you can actually develop these skills.
Well, our time has come, I guess. So first, I'd like to thank you guys. For those of you who are interested in what Flagship students do, you can go onto the Flagship website, and there's a thing called reports or something like that, and you can just see a wide range of what Flagship students end up doing. Some people end up doing exactly what was in their domain. For example, Kevin Slayton, his domain was Chinese labor laws, and his career has been China and Chinese labor since then. So sometimes it happens. It doesn't happen, I think, most of the time, because I guess in this field again, it's like you have to make up what you want to do and then go out and do it. A lot of what you want, there are not a lot of people who are doing what you want to do. So that means a burden on you to create it. And both Chris and Sasha have done that very well, and great finesse. So again, thank you.